Actually, I have probably told you yesterday about why we need to predict solar cycles, because they affect anthropogenic activities to a great extent now that science has advanced a lot, and we have put satellites in space, and then we have nuclear plants, so I mean, they are all affected by, if there's a large solar flare of CME, they will all be affected, and in that, and it is usually observed that the number of solar flares and CMEs, they would increase if there is a strong solar cycle. So that correlation is probably not always true. So we need to predict the number of sunspots that we would expect in a given cycle. And I had talked about the flux transport dynamo models yesterday, and these are a class of models which, kinematic models which are much closer to sunspot observations than any other dynamo model. So we have used one such model to predict the upcoming solar cycle 24, and this is slightly different from the normal weather prediction that we are more used to, because I will also tell you about the why we predict a week cycle.
Do you have a mic?
Huh?
Do you have a mic?
I can check that, but I doubt this. But we can.
Probably it would be good if I have a mic.
What?
It would be good if I have a mic.
Yes, but I'm not sure that it's
So should I continue or what? So anyway,
But sounding fairly weak.
yeah.
You will get tired.
No, I'm not tired. Maybe because of the cold or something.
But then you continue.
Okay. So this is some data, observational data about the present state of the solar weather, and we experienced the deepest solar minimum in last 100 years, and during this minimum, which started sometime in late 2006, and then the sun seems to have come out of that minimum just now in early 2010, and during that time there were last year in 2009, for example, there were no sunspots on the surface of the sun for 78% of the time, which is really unusual. And then the spacecraft Ulysses measured the lowest solar wind pressure since it started measuring, since solar wind pressure started being measured from 1960s. And then it was also detected that the solar irradiance reached a 12-year low. And then careful measurements by several NASA spacecrafts show that the sun's brightness has dropped by 0.02%, which is really small, but then it still has dropped at visible wavelengths. And then at a higher percentage at extreme UV wavelengths, because the magnetic field is basically responsible for the UV and the X-ray emission from the sun. So if the magnetic field strength is small, then the UV and the X-ray wavelengths would also decline. So the last cycle minimum, the last cycle minimum for 22, which was just before. So the last minimum was in 1996, and compared to that, these are the statistics. And this is another graph of the polar field, which is the BR component of the field measured at both the poles of the sun as a function of time. And this observation comes from the Virchow Solar Observatory data. So the blue curve is the magnetic field, BR in the north, in the south pole, and the red one is probably the north pole. So one is one and other one is the other one. And this is the averaged one. I think it's something like yearly average or something. And then you can see that during this solar minimum, I mean, actually, the solar minimum is in terms of sunspot number, and the solar minimum is actually the maximum for the polar field. So during the solar minimum, there was a large polar field just before cycle 23, and this this is the minimum before cycle 22, and this is the minimum before cycle 23. So you can see that this minimum is actually this polar field maximum is more than this one, whereas this is the solar minima that we were going through, and the polar field is actually very weak. And instead of following a curve where it rises and it falls, so it's like staying more or less steady and very weak during this time. It's just now that it has started to again decline during the rising phase of cycle 24. So this plot of the fact that the polar fields are very weak right now would be very important when I speak of sunspot cycle predictions. So now
like an astronaut.
You can sing now.
that's funny. But this is going to sleeping of course.
I think it might be reversed.
Maybe I can just keep it here and still
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes, the other way
Keep it
around.
just
Yeah,
like that.
that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is better. So
Breaking the parity.
yes. Yes. So now these dynamo models have recently reached a state of sophistication so that it can match. Why is it sounding?
I think you have to push it a little bit away from the screen.
I think I will rather keep it like this or something. I think this is fine. So that they can actually at least map, reproduce the regular features of the solar cycle. Like I was talking about yesterday, the sunspots being confined to low latitudes between plus minus 40 degrees, and then the polar field having the correct phase relationship with the sunspot number and all these things. But I think the first solar cycle prediction came using something called as the precursor method from observations in 2005, and just after that there were a huge number of papers trying to predict solar cycles, and I have just made a bar chart of all these predictions, and out of these predictions there are only 2 predictions from dynamo models, and the rest of them they range from using neural networks to observational data, and then other kind of weather forecasting kind of methods. So, but the strange thing is that there are these 2 dynamo models which have the same kind of an origin, and they use the same physics in the sense of the flux transport dynamo model. But these 2 dynamo models still give very different predictions. And that is what my effort would be to understand. Why is it that we use 2 different flux transport dynamo models and we still get conflicting results? So one prediction was by the Moushumi Dikpati's group at HAO Boulder, and they predicted, I think this bar in green is their prediction. They predict a solar cycle which is going to be very strong, and the sunspot number is probably order of 160 or something, the sunspot number during the maximum. This is what this means.
And at our group, we made a prediction here just a year after, and then we made a prediction of the sunspot number was more like 90. Sunspot number at the solar maximum was more like 90. And then there was this NASA prediction panel, which was set up with these other institutes. And they also could not decide. I mean, they wanted to use all these bars and do a statistics and do kind of a voting. So it's like a democracy. So they wanted to decide that what is the cycle strength going to be. So I think there were some 13 members in that panel, and people voted about what they think would be the strength for the upcoming cycle 24. And it turned out that seven of them voted for a weak cycle, and then 6 of them voted for a strong cycle. I mean, it was something like, people were not able to decide what's going to happen. So, and then later on they used these different predictions to arrive at a consensus. And then, as I was saying, this is a combination of this climatological, spectral, neural network, dynamo-based and precursor methods. So they kept releasing one prediction after another prediction. So, these official predictions. So at the time I prepared this talk for the Slovakia conference, so I haven't updated this, whether they have a next official prediction or not. But at that time, the prediction was that this is going to be a weak cycle with sunspot number like 90, and surprisingly it happened to match with the prediction we had made in the beginning of 2007. So, but we don't know what's going to happen anyway. So, as I was saying, that the first predictions from observations came using something called as the precursor method, which says that the polar field at the end of cycle n is the seed field for the sunspot maximum of the next cycle, n+1. So the polar field, say Pn, is going to seed the sunspot field Tn+1. So using such a precursor method, they said that since the polar field at the present time is weak, so it suggests a very weak solar cycle 24. But then, since dynamo models have also progressed to some extent and reached a degree of sophistication, so there should be something we can do with these dynamo models. After all, what's the use of just making dynamo models and not being able to apply it to the irregularities of the cycle? So in 2006, I think sometime in the middle of 2006, they predicted a strong solar cycle. And then just after this, there was a paper by Steve Tobias, Hughes and Wyeth in Nature, and they commented, I would read this comment out. They said, any predictions made with such models should be treated with extreme caution or perhaps disregarded, as they lack solid physical underpinnings. So, so then what does he want to say? What he wants to say is the solar dynamo process, according to Tobias, Hughes and Wyeth, is completely stochastic or chaotic. So no kind of forecasting is possible with any dynamo models, which cannot incorporate all the nonlinearities or the stochasticity that is present in the sun, because lots of things in these kinematic dynamo models are parametrized after all. So now we have two options. One is that, is the solar dynamo deterministic as modeled by Dikpati et al., or is it completely stochastic? Or is there a third option where these dynamo processes, as I was talking about yesterday, consist of different chain of events, And some of these events can be deterministic and some can be chaotic. Now, if that is the case, then we still have some hope for predicting solar cycles in future. So, I am back to this slide of the flux transport dynamo model, where we will try to see, we will try to enumerate all the processes again which are taking place in the sun and think about which process is deterministic and which process is stochastic. So, I will reiterate that in a flux transport dynamo model, the poloidal field is produced from the toroidal field at the surface from the Babcock-Clayton alpha mechanism. So, which depends on the decay of tilted active regions. And once the poloidal field is produced in this region, it is advected as well as diffused to this layer, to this overshoot layer here, where they are stretched by both the latitudinal as well as the radial shear in the tachocline to produce toroidal fields in this layer, and then they rise up to give rise to sunspots at the surface. So let us divide it into three different processes. The first one is where the poloidal field gets converted to strong toroidal field by stretching to differential rotation at the bottom of the convection zone. Now we can take this process to be fairly deterministic. And then the toroidal field is generated in the tachocline. It rises to the surface due to magnetic buoyancy and forms active regions. And the tilted bipolar active regions then decay to produce sunspots from the Babcock-Clayton alpha mechanism. And then thirdly, the meridional circulation that I have plotted as streamlines, blue streamlines in this figure, it carries the poloidal field first to the high latitudes and then it sinks into the tachocline situated at 0.7 R. So out of these three processes, the process 1 and the process 3 are fairly deterministic, whereas the process 2, which comprises of the Babcock-Clayton alpha mechanism, is stochastic. You would, maybe I have a slide here. Yeah, maybe you would remember that I was talking about Joy's law yesterday. So what happens is that these tilt of these active regions are actually functions of latitudes, and they kind of vary. They have a cos theta kind of a variation, but that variation is not very smooth. It has a lot of fluctuations in it. So there are some active regions which obey the Hale polarity rule, and I suppose you would remember that the Hale polarity rule is one in which the leading sunspot always lies towards the equator compared to the following spot in any cycle, and then but then there are active regions which in which the tilts are not which is given by the Joy's law. So they have a lot of variation around that mean given by the Joy's law. And that we suppose would be because of the stochastic, because it's a stochastic component, because there's a lot of turbulence at the solar surface, and this turbulence can turn or give rise to an extra ride to the flux tubes which actually are forming the sunspots at the surface. And when I'm talking about Babcock-Clayton alpha process, yesterday during these group seminars, we were talking about how to estimate this Babcock-Clayton alpha from the observations. So, I mean, we can do a small back of the envelope calculation. So, as I was saying that, suppose this is the solar surface here, and then there are two sunspots, and which has a positive B5. means, for example, this is a northern hemisphere of the sun. Positive B5 means that the following spot has to be positive and this has to be negative, so that the field actually goes like that in the direction of rotation of the sun. So this is the direction of rotation of the sun, And then after, and you can see that this bipolar pair, and this is the east-west direction. So this is, say, tilted at an angle, say, I would not say call it theta, I think I should rather call it phi, because theta is the latitude. And then when it decays, it would give rise to, now suppose the field here, the B phi is positive, when it decays it would give rise to clockwise lines of A in the northern hemisphere. So when that happens, and I mean this is basically the geometry of the Babcock-Leighton alpha process. So from here we can estimate the alpha by just using the simple form of this equation. And you know that the B phi in the sunspots, it doesn't matter what the B phi in the sunspots are, but the distance between these two bipolar regions is something like, say, 20,000 kilometers. And roughly the sunspots decay with a lifetime of, say, a week or something. So I will just make a conservative estimate that it decays with a time of 7 days. So this alpha effect, the Babcock-Leighton alpha, will actually be given by this L, which is L, this distance between the bipoles, and divided by the lifetime of the sunspot. So this is like L by tau s, and then this happens to be something between 20 to 50 meters per second. This is kind of a conservative estimate, but since the tilts at a particular latitude are not a smooth function of the latitude, so that's why the Babcock-Leighton alpha process involves a lot of stochasticity. Okay. So now let us see what does observations say about the relationship between the polar field and the toroidal field. So what is observed here is that we have defined something called the dipole moment of the sun, which, not to get you confused, is just the difference between the radial field in the north pole minus the radial field at the south pole. So it's just the difference between the two, and since the two are always opposite in sign, so it will just be double of the radial field at any one poles, and most of the time. So we define a dipole moment at the end of cycle n, and so this is the indicator of the strength of the polar field, and then we compare it with the sunspot number maximum of the cycle n+1, and you can see that there are very few observations available, and these solid circles here are actually based on proper magnetogram observations which are taken at Wilcox Solar Observatory. So, and these open circles are polar field data from the time when these magnetograms were not available, and the polar field was estimated using the position of the H alpha filaments in the sun. So the position of the H alpha filaments indicates the neutral line between the poloidal flux of the old field and the poloidal flux of the new field. So, for example, here I can write here as well. So this is the poloidal flux from the old field, which is already there, and then you have the poloidal flux which is forming from the toroidal field in this latitude, and you see lots of filaments, high latitude filaments in this region, in this neutral line between the old flux and the new flux. So by measuring this, you can say that, and if this flux is larger, then these positions will lie somewhere here. and if this flux is smaller, then it is easier to neutralize it, so the filament position will lie somewhere here. So using this, you can estimate the polar field magnitude indirectly, and at that time there was no magnetograms or no reliable measure of the polar field which was taken daily or something. I mean, for example, now the Wilcox Solar Observatory measures the polar field or takes a magnetogram photograph of the sun every day, and using that you can prepare these using these synoptic charts, you can prepare time dependent time latitude butterfly diagram of the polar field. That was not the case. So these were indirect measurements and these are direct measurements. And you can see from this figure that the polar field at the end of a cycle n is very well correlated with the sunspot number of the next cycle. So which means that there must be some kind of a causality relation between the polar field at the end of during a cycle minimum to the sunspot number of the next cycle maximum. Whereas if you just compare the sunspot number of say cycle n with the polar field which forms at the end of it. So this toroidal field is actually the result of the Babcock-Leighton alpha acting on this field. Then you don't see any correlation between these two. Whereas in this case, on observation, you see that there is a good correlation between the polar field which stretches to form this toroidal field. So observations provide a good indication that precursor methods are probably a reliable method of predicting solar cycles. Okay, so now in the last slide I was talking about this correlation between poloidal field and toroidal field. Now suppose you have two quantities A and B which you see are correlated, then you would probably say that, oh, maybe A is causing B, right? But then it may not be the case. There may be a third process C which is causing both these processes A and B. And since C is correlated with A as well as C is correlated with B, you find that process A and B also appear to be correlated. But it's not necessary that process A is, directly or causally related to process B. So our idea is that this is probably what is happening inside the sun. So here the process C is the Babcock-Leighton alpha process, and this process P is the advection of polar fields which is formed at C to the high latitude by the meridional circulation. And this process T here is the formation of toroidal field from this poloidal field. So this poloidal field diffuses down to the tachocline and forms the toroidal field here. So what happens is the time between the formation of poloidal field here and its advection to the poles is equal to the time of diffusion of the poloidal field to the tachocline, where it again forms the toroidal field. In that case, it would appear that the polar field here is correlated with the toroidal field here. But this polar field is not actually causing this, but it is caused by the poloidal field which diffuses down directly to the tachocline. And the polar field that we see is just the result of advection of that polar field to the poles. So in that sense, I am again showing this plot for time scales. So in our flux transport dynamo models, we have taken this C to T diffusion to be 5 to 10 years, and this time scale. So this time scale is 5 to 10 years in our model, whereas it is something like 250 years in the model of Dikpati and Gilman. And diffusion coefficient is just given by this the mixing length estimate. So you can see here that the diffusion time scale is something like 6 years for us here. And then the meridional circulation also takes something around 4 years to advect the polar field to the poles. And then what happens is this toroidal field comes down in 6 years, and in another 5 or 6 years, the poloidal field comes down in 6 years, and it gets converted to the toroidal field in another 5 to 6 years, and then it rises up, right? So that's why you see that the polar field which is formed during a cycle minimum is directly correlated to the toroidal field which is formed in the next cycle, but after a gap of 5 years. So there is a gap of 5 years between the polar field maximum and the next toroidal field maximum. So, and you see this correlation in the model only when you have this diffusion time scale equal to this advection time scale. I mean, this is a very important idea in the model, and I mean, if you have any doubts, I mean, please ask me at this point, because this is very important.
Just ask, why do you have such a huge difference between the Dick-Patty-Gilman?
That is again because you mean why have we taken different diffusion coefficients?
Yeah, I mean, why did they do what they did, and why do you do
Okay.
what
One reason why they have taken a low diffusivity is that they want to have the when they were doing this flux transfer dynamo calculation in a full sphere, they were never able to get the correct time period as well as the parity, the dipolar parity of the solar magnetic fields in their model. Because when they increased the diffusivity, what was happening was the toroidal field was also toroidal field is supposed to be antisymmetric across the equator, was also diffusing, and then it was also becoming symmetric. So it was, I mean, even if you start with an antisymmetric parity, the model will always go to a symmetric parity. So what we did, that our model has actually a trick included in it, and the trick is that we use different diffusivities for the toroidal field and the poloidal field. So even with a higher diffusivity for the poloidal field, since it's the diffusion of the poloidal field which matters here, because of that, I mean, our model doesn't suffer from the parity problems.
So the basic thing is that they just had one diffusivity.
They have one diffusivity.
And then they had to take that very low, because otherwise they couldn't get the cycle thing
They
right.
could not.
You've got more freedom because you've taken two diffusivity.
Yes,
You can get the cycle right.
Yeah. The parity of the cycle, right, as well as the time period of the cycle, right. Because if you remember that I was telling yesterday that they use a non-local formulation for the Babcock-Leighton alpha effect, which means that the alpha that they take in their model has to be multiplied by the toroidal field. So which is the toroidal field that you multiply the alpha with? Is it the toroidal field that is forming at the tachocline, or is it the toroidal field at the surface? So they had a non-local formulation where even though alpha is concentrated at the surface, but they multiply it by the toroidal field at the bottom of the convection zone. And that non-local, in presence of that non-local alpha effect, the high diffusivity actually short circuits the dynamic process, and the time periods become of the order of the diffusion time scales. So something like, say, the dynamo periods always turned out to be something like 2 or 3 years when you use a non-local formulation and you use a high diffusivity. That happens in our model also. So to circumvent that, we don't use a non-local formulation. We use a local formulation of the Babcock-Leighton alpha.
And what is now critical for the differences in the prediction? It's I thought it's the fact that you are actually using the dipole moment as input, whereas they are using the sunspot number as input.
Yes, so there are these two things. One is the diffusivity and one is this causality thing. So now if suppose the diffusive time scale from here to here is very large, then in that case the field has to, the only process for the poloidal field to arrive at the tachocline is by the meridional circulation, right? And the diffusion doesn't play much of a role there. So then that breaks this correlation between this process and this process. And when that correlation is broken, then the model is like it has more memory of the previous cycle. because the diffusivity is very low. So then that makes the relationship between the polar field and the sunspot cycles very nonlinear.
But the input, I thought that's really the most critical part.
Input is from what they call the photospheric magnetic fields, which is just, I think, derived from the sunspot areas, right? So there they have taken their polar field to be proportional to the toroidal field, whereas we have taken this process to be stochastic. Right, so the polar field that is formed is not proportional to the toroidal field that has come out of the surface in that cycle. Whereas they have taken that process to be deterministic. So as I was saying in this plot here, they have taken this toroidal to poloidal thing as deterministic.
Excuse me. Don't they use also the return flow from the meridional circulation? Is it not also a little bit higher?
Yes, it's higher, but that does not affect the prediction thing. I mean, even if I do the prediction with a shallow meridional flow, I mean shallow in the sense that it penetrates only to 0.7 solar radii. In our model, it goes up to 0.64 solar radii or something. So even if it does that, it does not affect the prediction because of this balance between the diffusive transport and the advective transport. And the idea of having a more penetrating meridional circulation, whether it is physical or not, is just not to allow the sunspot to erupt at the surface, not to at higher latitudes in the surface.
But what do you, what do you know? What happens if you took their model, for example, or even any other model, and used really the important thing, namely putting in the dipole moment as input?
Yes, we have done that as well.
And does it work much better?
No, it doesn't give you the same correlations. So that I will show some plots later on. So I'll compare this with a low diffusivity model, and I'll actually show how the field is being transported for a high diffusivity model and a low diffusivity model. This is the plot here. So what happens in a high diffusivity model is that the poloidal field that is formed here, it just diffuses straight down. So the advection doesn't play, it does play a role, but since the time scales are comparable, the diffusion transport is also important. So you see how the field lines are behaving in high diffusivity models, whereas this is a corresponding low diffusivity model. So this is the same model that I was showing yesterday from the Dikpati Charbonneau 99 paper, which I showed as a first example of the successful flux transport dynamos. So they have a diffusivity, I think it's of the order of 5 into 10 raised to 11 centimeters square per second, and ours is something like 2 into 10 raised to 12 centimeters squares per second, so like 50 times here and there. So you can see here these poloidal field lines which are formed at the surface are really being advected towards the poles by the meridional circulation. They do not come straight down because of the diffusion. So you can see the difference in the transport in case of a high diffusivity model and a low diffusivity model. And okay, here I think yesterday Kandu was asking a question about this generation of helicity because of this these field lines interacting, field lines getting linked with the toroidal field. So actually in a solar model there are methods of throwing out the helicity. For example, there are these solar flares and CMEs which will continuously throw out the helicity out of the sun. So most often the solar dynamo modelers, they do not worry about the helicity.
No, they don't worry about helicity not because they think it can be thrown out, because they don't worry about helicity. I think Axel is trying to get these fluxes out through coronal mass ejections and all, but that's not really bad yet, I guess.
What do you...
Say this again.
There's a gap.
Say this again.
Sorry?
Say this again.
No, I'm saying they're not worrying about helicity because they just simply don't worry about helicity. Not because they have in the back of the mind that helicity is being got rid of, etc., and that it's not a problem because there is a flux. It's only, I think, very few people who think you need the flux and so you worry. And you try to get these coronal mass ejections to make the flux. I don't think it's shown anywhere that you will not have the problem with these models, because unless you have those fluxes demonstrated, you won't be able to show that.
Yeah, but for a 1D model, actually, we saw that it does alleviate the catastrophic quenching, but I mean, we still need to do these calculations for a 2D model. But then, I mean...
but what flux did you put?
What flux? Yeah, I mean, I just, I mean, used to throw these out. I mean, suppose the helicity increases a certain value, certain critical value, and just throw that some flux, I mean, just decrease that flux in that point. So which is
so you
like...
certainly recognize that you need the flux, but how the flux operates is not at all clear.
Yes, that is not
And, and people who do these dynamo models don't worry about it. It's not because they think it's being solved somehow. They just don't have it in their head, I think.
I mean, maybe another way of putting it is the following. Whenever you make a model, you want to make sure that you use the right theory for that. And so any theory that you propose can be thrown down if it doesn't obey the correct physics that you know, which is, for example, a numerical simulation. And so one of the simplest settings, of course, is this periodic box, which is where you see the most devastating catastrophic quenching. And clearly, if you just put an alpha effect with a simple quenching formula, then of course that very clearly doesn't obey what you see in the simulations. And so clearly this model cannot be accepted unless you have other good philosophical reasons. And those reasons could be, of course, and of course that is actually showable, are related to the presence of magnetic helicity fluxes, which really modify the quenching formula in a way which renders it close to what you were using in the beginning. But that's, of course, a matter of luck and a matter of detail also.
Yes.
I mean, if you, there could be things like the cycle period, for example, which will be on other properties of the dynamo which may be modified.
But, sorry,
But a more complicated process.
Since the Backward-Platen mechanism operates above the box, that alpha, the Backward-Platen alpha mechanism does not disrespect conservation of helicity within
But as Kandu was saying, it produces a large-scale magnetic helicity,
Yes.
and whenever you have large-scale magnetic helicity, locally there will be a tendency to follow magnetic helicity conservation, which means there must be a build-up of small-scale magnetic helicity. And now the question is, what does it do? And we actually know what it does. It namely quenches the dynamo, no matter what. Even if you have something at the very surface, you build up something in the rest of the volume which tries to counteract that.
I mean, for example, the interface dynamos, they don't work with the dynamic formulation of alpha effect. I mean, dynamic quenching of the alpha effect, which is like you put a different equation for, like Kandu was showing yesterday, you have a equation for the small scale helicity and you add it to the dynamo equations. So the interface dynamo was formulated by Parker to alleviate this problem of catastrophic quenching was not known then. I mean, for this turbulent quenching, the quenching of this alpha effect by the magnetic fields. But it doesn't work with the dynamical formulation. It works with the weak form, the strong form, but not with the
strongest.
So these. So now, after talking about this low diffusivity and high diffusivity models, so parallelly when we were working on this prediction and its conceptual understanding, so there was a paper which actually studied this in detail. So they distinguished different regimes in which the dynamo is operating. So one is the advection dominated regime, where the transport by the meridional circulation happens to be more important than the diffusive transport, and other is the diffusion dominated regime, in which the transport by the diffusion is transport as well as the dissipation by diffusion is more important than the meridional circulation. So I have just shown these two figures from their paper here, like Itsnondi and Mackay. So they have the cycle duration as a function of the peak flow speed. So this is the flow speed which you will observe at mid-latitudes in the surface of the sun, of the meridional circulation. And they have different diffusivity. So this is like a low diffusivity. This is the lowest diffusivity they took, which is equal to the Moshwe, Dikpati and Gilman model. And then this is the highest one, the solid, thick solid thing here, and the thin solid one is the lowest one. So they didn't see, I mean, they saw a huge difference with this, the variation of cycle duration as a function of peak flow speed at different regimes. So this is a non-linear thing. So it's not linearly, it doesn't linearly vary with the diffusion. And then an interesting thing came out when they compared the cycle amplitude, which is like the sunspot maximum, with the peak flow speed of the meridional circulation. So in the low diffusivity regime, what happened is the cycle amplitude increased first with the meridional flow and then it decreased. Whereas in the high diffusivity regime, the cycle amplitude actually kept on increasing. So now this is a complete non-linear thing that is happening here. And when such a thing happens, you really cannot have any correlation between cycle amplitude and cycle length. So what is happening here is when the meridional circulation is weak, for example, consider this curve here. So this part, the left half of this curve and the right half of this curve. So in the left half of this curve, the meridional circulation is weak, and the diffusion is also weak. But the meridional circulation is weaker still. And so this, so in this, what happens is gradually as you increase the peak flow speed, so the diffusion is a kind of dissipation after all. So as you increase the flow speed, what happens is the fields get transported faster and faster, and then the diffusion doesn't have time to act on that field, and hence the amplitude grows. Whereas in this right half, what happens is in the right half, what happens is the field is this meridional flow is still much higher, and then that actually let me think. In this regime, it's the meridional circulation which is more important. Okay, maybe I'll think about this plot and come back later. Okay. So here we did some calculations with the dm versus the sunspot number maximum in the model. So what we did was at the solar minimum, the polar field is supposed to be at its maximum, right? And which means that all the sunspots have more or less decayed and they have formed all the poloidal field they could form. And at this point, we just replace the entire polar field in the meridional plane by a poloidal field which is observed, right? And when which is observed, or whatever we want to put in there. So we initialize the model at every solar minimum or the polar field maximum. So this is like giving a random kick to the model. So so here you have your polar field to toroidal field, and then the poloidal field and to toroidal field. So this is for cycle n, and then this is n plus 1, and then this is n plus 1, and this is n plus 2. So this is a deterministic process, whereas this is a random process. This is operating due to the alpha effect. So at these links, we give the system a random kick. At this point and then again here. Again here. And then this gamma here is actually just a coefficient which multiplies the poloidal field in the domain at the minimum. So suppose in the code the poloidal field is something like this. We just multiplied it by a factor gamma. Now this can be greater than 1 or it can be less than 1 depending on the random number generator that you are using. Okay. So we give such random kicks to the system and we find that as the gamma varies between 0.5 to 1.5 here, so you see that gamma at the end of cycle n is very well correlated to the sunspot number maximum of the next cycle, and the correlation coefficient is very high, it is like 0.9. Whereas this is a plot for the high diffusivity model, whereas for low diffusivity model, if you do the same thing, like I have like that scheme there, then you don't find any correlation between this gamma and the sunspot number of the sunspot number at the next cycle. So, so this is from Surya, which is our model, and this is the model of Dikpati and Charbonneau 1999. And we used this, we could reproduce the results in this model, but we were not able to reproduce the exact model they have used in their calculations. So we went back one step and used a model which we could reproduce.
So that's the poloidal diffusivity that is relevant here, and that's big for you.
Yes.
50 times bigger than the toroidal.
The toroidal field diffusivity is actually same in both the cases.
In their cases,
Yes.
but it's low.
No, the toroidal field diffusivity that we have in our model is same as the turbulent diffusivity they have in their model.
Yes, and that's because you want the parity to be right.
Yes.
Just to understand, with the Dikpati and Charbonneau, there's no correlation. All you're doing is you're integrating their equations with a different initial condition. Is that right? So
No. We are following the same method. For example, even in this case, what we are doing is at the sunspot minimum, we are multiplying the poloidal field by a random number, because that poloidal field has to form by the stochastic Babcock-Leighton process.
Yeah, but that model is not stochastic, is it? I mean, their equations are just completely deterministic equations. So it's surprising.
Look, the regular model is actually deterministic in both the cases, right?
Right.
And the way in which we are introducing stochasticity is by initializing the poloidal field at every solar minimum. Right. Other than that, there is no stochasticity. There are non-linearities. For example, in their model, they have an alpha quenching, which is the only non-linearity. And in our model, we don't have an alpha quenching because the Babcock-Leighton process should be fairly independent of the magnetic field. And so the only non-linearity in our model is the magnetic buoyancy algorithm that we use. The two models have different non-linearities, but that is only to limit the amplitude. So the regular cycle properties are more or less the same in the two models here.
Yeah.
But only thing is that since they don't use a magnetic buoyancy algorithm, we cannot calculate a sunspot number from their model. Whereas the buoyancy algorithm of erupting a magnetic field at the surface every time the magnetic field at the bottom of the Tackock line, bottom of the convection zone exceeds a critical value, that allows us to actually count the number of eruptions that have occurred. So that convenience is not there in that code. So how we estimate this maximum sunspot number is just by measuring the magnitude of the phi component of the magnetic field, of the toroidal field.
But I mean, when you talk about stochasticity, this is some necessary ingredient of any model that wants to do a prediction,
Yes,
because you need to adjust the model to the actual sun,
Yeah.
and they will not be in agreement with each other anyway. And there's a difference, of course, because you are resetting the dipolar moment in your model,
Every time.
whereas they are resetting the local alpha effect in some sense, the Babcock-Leighton effect, based on the sunspot number.
Yes, yeah, right, exactly. So in that case, they are not initializing at the solar minimum. I think they are probably initializing at a frequency of every month or something, depending on the sunspot number that is there. And this poloidal field is proportional to the sunspot area, or I think they use something called as the photospheric magnetic field. So which is found to be proportional to the sunspot number anyway. So they are not using the fact that this is a stochastic process. That is the difference.
Another important thing is perhaps, if you remember the magnetogram of BR, which Piali showed yesterday.
I think I'm going to show it even today.
Yes,
once.
there you will see that the magnetic field near the poles is very regular. There's very little noise. And that's what they are using as input. So they are using input that is not very noisy, whereas they are using input that comes from low latitudes, which is very noisy.
Very noisy, yeah. Oh, well, in that sense, actually, I have also done the calculation using actual magnetogram data, but then we had to do some smoothing and all before we could actually use that data in the model. So this method where we just multiply it by a gamma, which is proportional to the dipole moment, is the simplest method. But even this simple method agrees with the more elaborate method where we actually use the magnetogram data to calculate this polar field. So
Yeah, but it's
even
still
though
a
that's
polar
a more
field.
elaborate method, it's not doesn't give a result which is very different from this simple method. So this is probably more easier to understand conceptually what is exactly happening.
So gamma is a sample from a uniform distribution, or you're
No,
using
gamma is just the dipole moment. The dipole moment is that you just measure.
Oh, sorry, the random number that you
Yeah.
choose.
Yes, but how do you get it from the observations? So
Okay.
what we have done is, what has happened is the Wilcox Solar Observatory has this polar field data regularly observed from 1976 onwards. And using that data, we can calculate the radial magnetic field at the North Pole as well as the South Pole. So we take the difference. And when we take this difference, so you get a curve like this. And we have assumed that the cycle 23 is like a regular cycle, how the sun would behave if there were no fluctuations. It's the regular cycle or the average cycle. And we consider the polar field at the end of cycle 22, which is the precursor for this sunspot number of cycle 23, as gamma equal to 1, right? And then we compare it with the dm value of the other cycles. For example, just after cycle 23, the polar field was something like I think I have the numbers, I think around 0.6 times the regular polar field. Whereas in cycle 22, that is at the end of cycle 21, the polar field was something like 1.25 times the regular polar field. So gamma is actually a fraction which measures how much the polar field varies. Yes. So once more, this process in some detail. So this is the random peak I was talking about during the formation of toroidal to poloidal field. And what we have done is, this is like a sunspot number as a function of time. This is the solar minimum. We have initialized the model at this point, right? So now the cycle has two different parts. One is this declining phase where the Babcock-Leighton process is operating on the toroidal field, and then this rising phase where the differential rotation is operating. So you can always see that in sunspot numbers you see these two different declining rate and a growth rate. That is because it's two different physical processes which are responsible for the decay and the growth of the field. So you see this difference in the time scales in that. So we initialize the model at the solar minimum, and what we do is at the solar minimum we replace the A, which is the poloidal field, by gamma times A in the computation domain for r greater than 0.8 solar radii. Why 0.8? Because we thought that we should retain the memory effects that is there in the sun. So for example, even if you use a low diffusivity model, so all this poloidal field of the previous cycle would probably be buried below 0.8 solar radii. So we don't want to disturb that. So we want to retain the memory that the sun has. So that's why we only update the field above 0.8 solar radii and not from 0.7 solar radii. But then later we found out that even if we vary this from 0.75 to 0.85, it doesn't make much of a difference in the, I mean it does make a difference, but then we always keep getting weaker cycles for gamma less than 1. Yes, so maybe I will just, so I suppose that I think I have already said whatever we have done. So this is the methodology of our prediction. So we run the dynamo code in the usual way from one solar minimum to the next. Then at the time of the minimum, we change the amplitude of the polar field suitably so that it agrees with the observed value. And then we run the code again to the next minimum. So this gives us the sunspot number at the solar maximum. Okay. Now before we look at the results, we have to, I was talking about this memory of this sun. So what we have done here is at the solar minimum of this cycle, we have given a random kick which is less 30%, which is like one kick is like gamma is equal to 0.7 and the other kick is gamma is equal to 1.3. So you see that when gamma was 0.7, this sunspot number has actually decreased in the next maximum, and not only the next maximum is weak, but the sun takes some time to recover to the regular value of the sunspot number, and it has a cycle which is weaker than the regular one in between. So it takes 2 cycles to recover, and the same happens when you increase the value of that gamma. So again it takes 2 cycles to recover to the average value. So using the regression analysis, these people who use the precursor method for predicting solar cycle, they said that the toroidal field at cycle n+1 is directly related to the dipole moment of cycle n, and only the dipole moment of cycle n. But in our model we expect a more complicated relation where the toroidal field depends on the dipole moment of cycle n as well as cycle n-1. So there is some kind of memory in our model, but then we'll see that this memory is much longer in the model which have low diffusivities. Okay, so this is what happens when we use that method for predicting the solar cycle. So now as I was saying that we have reliable magnetogram data 1976 onwards. So we have polar field data here, here and here. So we initialize our model with polar field data in 1976 and we simulate the sunspot maximum of cycle 21. And then again we input the polar field data of at the end of cycle 21 and we get 22, and we do it in a step-by-step fashion. And then you can see that cycle 22 and 23 fairly agree with the observed one. The observed one is this dashed curve here, and the one from the model is this solid curve, whereas the one in the cycle 21 doesn't agree. That may be because, as I said, that the solar cycle has some memory, so it depends not on the toroidal field depends not only on the poloidal field of the previous cycle but also the one before that. Yes?
One question. You just count the number of eruptions
Yes.
Or in order to have those kind of numbers, you have to scale at least.
We
the
have to
first.
scale it,
Okay.
but we scaled it with this case. So we have to scale, but everything has been scaled by the same number.
Yes, I know. But what kind of scaling do you use? Do you know the expression?
That is probably something like that. Actually depends on the on another parameter in the model, so which like controls the number of eruptions. That I mean, for example, we check whether the toroidal field has reached a critical value after every 40 time steps, say, in the model. So that depends on that, how frequently we are doing that. And I think probably we had to half that number in this case. So I think it was something like probably 200 or something, and then we had to scale it so that it probably was something like that. And then in this middle panel, you can see these breaks. So this is again like the dipole moment that I was talking about. So you can see this break in the poloidal field. So this is where the model has been initialized, and this is the corresponding butterfly diagram. So now we predict that the cycle 24 will be 40% weaker than cycle 23. In contrast to the other prediction by the Dynamo model, where they predict that cycle 24 will be 50% stronger. So now if our identification of the polar field generation mechanism as the only random process in the dynamo cycle is true, then we cannot predict solar cycles 5 to 6 years in advance. So we can, during a solar minimum, we can only predict the next cycle. We cannot predict the cycle after that. If this alpha effect is the only random process in the dynamo cycle, then it just stops your prediction after you have calculated the next the sunspot number maximum of the next cycle. Okay, and then there is I would probably not go through this, but this is a method we had used to actually feed observational data from actual magnetograms into the model, rather than this very simple process. So this is an example of the an averaged in time. I think we used a 3-year average or something, and then this is the magnetogram data from Wilcox Solar Observatory, and you can see there are these sunspots here and the polar field here. So this is like an extended butterfly diagram, and then this just gives you the BR component of the field. So we actually used this data. So what we did was we, you know that the BR component is related to the poloidal field potential by this relation, right? Because this is just the curl of this. So now using this relation, now for dynamo model, for this axisymmetric dynamo model, we need to calculate the poloidal field potential. So given the line of sight field, we can just integrate this field to calculate the poloidal field potential from the radial component. So we start integrating from the north pole and we go towards the equator, and so the south pole to the equator, and then again we do another integration from the north pole to the equator, and then we get different values here which we smoothly match. And we smooth this out here, so that we have a polar field which is like symmetric about the latitude. So you cannot just integrate from south pole to north pole, because when you end up here, end up after integration here, this will have 0 value, but this will have a very non-zero value. So it is unphysical to make that 0 forcibly. So you just match from both sides, from the poles to the equator. And then there are these techniques for people who are interested. Maybe I can tell you later, in which you just calculate the poloidal field potential from that observed data. And in this technique, there is one advantage, that since we were updating the poloidal field 0.8 solar radii onwards. So after that used to leave kind of a discontinuity in the polar field. So this is at a solar minimum just after we have refreshed the field. But then this doesn't matter much because it used to get smoothened out in a matter of a week or something. So that is something like 20 time steps in our code. Whereas with the magnetogram data and the method which I have used, there is no such discontinuity with the update above 0.8 solar radii. But then that using the actual data also tells me that the cycle will be something like 35% weaker. It doesn't even, okay, not 40% but 35% weaker, but still weaker. So now what are the probable causes of conflicting predictions? One is the conceptual difference, which is this Babcock-Leighton alpha process has been treated as deterministic, unlike ours. And then there is a model difference, which is that the diffusivity is 50 times smaller than ours inside the convection zone. And their model works in the advection-dominated regime because the diffusive time scale in the convection zone is something like 250 years for them, whereas for us it is 5 years. So for them the meridional circulation is more important, and less diffusivity actually means longer memory for fluctuations. So your toroidal field at cycle n+1 depends not only on the colloidal field of cycle n, but also on n+1, n-1, n-2, etc. But then we'll come to know about what is exactly going to happen when Sun decides to do something in the next cycle. Probably it's expected that the cycle will reach its maximum sometime in 2012 or 2013. So then we'll know what exactly is happening. And then a question that naturally arises is that why have we used high diffusivity in our model? Is there any observational evidence or any reason for doing that? So one thing is that if you use this simple mixing length theory, which will have its own problems, but then if you use this conservative estimates that the turbulent velocity in those eddies are something like very small, 10 meters per second, but the pressure scale height at the bottom of the convection, not exactly at the bottom, but a little above that is something like 30,000 kilometers, then you get that the turbulent diffusivity should be of this order, 10⁻²². And then Parker used this convection model of Sprout, which was developed in 1974, to show that the turbulent diffusivity could be of this order, 1 to 10⁻²12. And then also to match the surface observations of sunspot decay, we need a high diffusivity. I was showing this surface flux transport model developed by this Lindau group here in 2006. So I hope you have not confused this surface flux transport with flux transport dynamos, because this is not a dynamo model. Here what they had done is they just had they have just modeled, this is just a partial differential equation for evolution of BR under the influence of sunspot eruptions. So that is like a source function in their model, and this evolves under the influence of the meridional circulation, the diffusivity, and the differential rotation. And they find good agreement with observations when they use a diffusivity of 5 into 10⁻² centimeters square per second at this surface. It's still higher than what we have used. This is the evidence of diffusivity on the surface. You can only observe that. What is happening inside the sun, that is one, it's like a black box. We don't know what is the diffusivity inside the sun.
So basically, this group calculates what you assume as a random kick there.
Which group?
The Baumann group.
Oh, no. This is not a dynamo model.
No, I know. It's the evolution on the surface. Just the evolution of the surface.
So they have a regular function of sunspot eruption. So what they have a function which looks like the butterfly diagram on the of the sun.
Yes.
So they just put some BR at regular intervals and all. And they can also change the overlap between the cycles. They can change the time period of the cycle just using this forcing function.
Yes, but basically that's what's lacking on
They have
Surya,
not
right?
used any random kick. This force
No,
function is a regular function.
I know, but that's actually what's lacking on Surya. Surya calculates everything else, then pops up the field at the surface.
Yes,
Then
yes.
this model could be used to
Yes, exactly. Yes,
calculate
exactly.
the
yeah.
polar field, and then it comes
Mhm.
back to Surya again.
Yes,
so.
yeah. So actually it's like, it's not, so this is a theta phi model. So what you have to do is you have to do this calculation in theta phi for, the random BR that is there. And then you have to put this back into the R theta model. So it's like,
Yes.
so it's not a full 3D thing. And then you have to average this over the phi and then feed it in the model. Okay. So there are some other arguments for high diffusivity from a modeling point of view, and that is the dipolar nature of the solar colloidal field requires high diffusivity to couple across the equator. And this is the reason we have to use these two different diffusivities as well, and one of the diffusivity much higher than the other. And there is this other work where we found that the solar activity, it is observed that the solar activity is highly correlated in both hemispheres. So usually what is observed is that when the cycle is strong, you have more sunspots in both the hemispheres. I mean, they are like both of them. They in both the hemispheres the cycle is strong, or in both the hemispheres the cycle is weak. And that may not be the case during the Maunder minimum, but I mean for most of the cycle that is the case. So now to highly correlate the solar activity in both these hemispheres, you would need diffusivity to enforce this coupling, and even in presence of stochastic fluctuations. So in this model, what we did was we took two different alpha, backpocket and alpha values in the two different hemispheres. So in one hemisphere it was alpha n and alpha s, and they differed by just 2%. And then we observed that the two hemispheres have two different periods, but as you keep running them, so this time is actually in years. So it is like 2000, 4000, 6000, 8000, when we ran it to 12,000 years. So, and then we do see that this, even though the alpha value is different in both the hemispheres, if you use a high diffusivity, they will try to, the solutions will try to be phase locked with each other and have a single period. And in this case, the solution always remained dipolar in nature. Whereas in the other case, where the diffusivity was slightly lower, I mean, probably it was a factor of 5 lower or something, then the solution was quadrupolar, and what happened is these two time periods actually never came back together. They always remained separate. And there is also in this solution, the parity was not exactly dipolar, but it was something like minus 0.04. Okay, the parity is how the parity is measured is that we have just calculated the magnetic energy. So it's like Bn, and then this is averaged over your d theta dr, and then minus, sorry, I should probably write this as the symmetric component and the antisymmetric component. And this is only in the phi for the toroidal field, divided by the total energy. So it's just the sum of this. So whenever the parity is quadrupolar, this energy dominates, and the parity is said to be +1. And whenever the antisymmetric component of the magnetic field dominates, the parity is -1. So the sun has a parity of -1. But in this model where we had taken two different values of alpha in two hemispheres, he found the parity actually reaches an equilibrium value of minus 0.4. And whereas in the solution with a lower diffusivity, the parity kind of keeps on oscillating between quadrupolar and dipolar with a period of 2000 years or something. And it is this 2000 years is inverse of the beat frequency. So you take this is the time period in the northern hemisphere, it's the time period in the southern hemisphere, and the actual is this. This is the time period of the parity oscillation that we observe in that figure. So this work also shows that for the two hemispheres to be coupled to each other, it is necessary that we should have a high diffusivity in the model. Okay, and then when the cycle 24 was actually going through a very deep minimum, lots of people used to ask that, are we going to enter a Maunder minimum? So people were very scared. So here Orno did a work with his PhD student, and what they did was they used the same method of random kicks, but now they split this gamma into two parts. So one was gamma n in the northern hemisphere and one was gamma s in the southern hemisphere. So after a regular cycle here, what they did was they took this gamma n to be equal to very small, I think something like 0.1 or something, and this was something like 0.4 or something like that. Now when they did this, so the cycle abruptly stopped. So the sunspots abruptly stopped appearing on the surface of the sun, but still there were these. If you plot in the model, if you plot the magnetic field, which is B5, then you still see some butterfly diagrams, but there were no eruptions. So it abruptly stopped, and then you don't do anything. They just allowed the model to relax as it is, and after some time, the model gradually came out of this minimum on its own, and this actually behaves pretty much like it did in the Maunder minimum. So the sun abruptly entered the Maunder minimum, but when it came out very gradually. And also what was observed is that there was an asymmetry in the number of sunspots in this case. So all that was done in this model was, after this cycle, they imposed these two different gamma on this gammas at the solar minimum, and they allowed it to evolve. This is my last slide. Yeah, this is my last slide actually. Yeah, so I think I'm done.
Thank you very much, Piali. And questions, please.
Yeah, so the answer is that we are actually not entering a Maunder minimum because we need gammas much less than what has already been observed. So the dipole moment was something like 0.6 or something, whereas you really have to use gammas much smaller than that to get this. So you're probably not entering a Maunder minimum.
So 0.4 is what you need for Maunder
No,
minimum?
when one hemisphere it was like 0.1 or maybe
0.1.
even less than that.
And we have only 0.6, yeah. Yes, please.
So you said that you're using high diffusivity. So how do you choose, when you go and do the simulation, how do you choose the real number? You have some
Yes,
from
so
the past? Or,
no, we were using some estimates from this this kind of mixing length thing. And then the actual tuning was done so that the parity of the solution always remains dipolar. So for example, if we use say 1 into 10 raised to 12, then sometimes for some parameter regimes the solution used to go to quadrupolar parity. But when we use this 2.5 times 10 raised to 12, the solution always remained dipolar. So maybe you have to take a diffusivity which is higher than that to have the correct parity.
and have you tried to use the code to analyze past cycles, like going back in
going back in time.
And see if your code gives the right answer.
Yes, that is what. Okay, in a sense, that is what we did when we tried to match the amplitudes of cycle 21 and 22 and 23. So these are the fast cycles. But we could do this only because we had observational data at the corresponding solar minima before these 3 cycles, and that matched pretty well. But the amazing thing is that in the model of Dikpati Gilman as well, they have also matched all previous cycle. I think probably from cycle 14 or something, they have matched all the cycles till cycle 23, and they have predicted a higher cycle 24. But still, if you do these correlations, the correlations that come out from their model don't match that of the observation. The correlation between the polar field and the toroidal field. So that is like amazing. I mean, they have matched all the previous solar cycles, but their result is completely different from ours.
Yes, please.
What is the physical justification for 2 different diffusions?
Actually, probably I can give you a weak physical justification, and that is the diffusivity is a turbulent coefficient, so which also will be quenched by magnetic fields. And now, since the toroidal field is concentrated in terms of flux tubes, and we cannot go to flux tube scales in the mean field models, so having a different diffusivity for the toroidal field is actually a way to put the fact that they are like flux tubes.
Okay, so that's why you have that
Yes.
middle step.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, it finally reaches the same diffusivity as the polar field near the surface, because I mean, you see the sunspot diffusing. I mean, the surface, I mean, from this flux transport, I am saying all this now, but of course at that time we didn't match this thing with our result, but then it turned out that the number which we took is surprisingly close to what the observations are.
So basically that interstep accounts for some diffusion quenching.
Yes, yeah.
Could it just be thought of as a tensor turbulent diffusion?
You mean this different eta p and eta t? Actually, no.
Is it what?
A
Tensor thing. No, because the tensor would probably be different in different directions as well, right?
No. I mean, it
This
would
is
be
like an
it would be a
isotropic-
rank 3 tensor, of course. And what you are saying, of course, is that 2 of these components should be different.
Yes, yeah. So I
And
don't know. I have
The
not
tensor
arranged it
mixes,
like a tensor.
the tensor mixes up contributions from different directions. I mean, different derivatives, x, y, and z derivatives, as well as the 3 components. And,
No,
and
but
we are
then,
worried at the moment
won't
about
it-
the 3 components, namely poloidal and toroidal.
Yes, but then won't it happen that the field diffuses in r direction faster than it diffuses in theta direction? So I mean, if you use a tensor, probably that will be the case, right?
I mean, it must be a tensor what you have.
Yes.
here.
Yes, in that
But,
sense. But it's isotropic. I mean, these eta p and eta t are isotropic. I mean,
No, you can't have isotropic and different diffusion coefficients.
Yeah,
You
but
have to have tensor. Only thing how to cook up such a tensor is a different question.
I mean, the reason why she can get away with this is because she is in the alpha omega limit. So the assumption is that the toroidal field is always much stronger
then
than the other fields. So therefore, only these 2 components show up in the end. But I must say that at the moment, from test field methods where we can calculate eta, also in the presence of magnetic field, we have not seen any differences of the diffusion of poloidal and toroidal fields yet. They are the same, even in the quenched case. So that, but the thing that has not been looked at is different directions. We have only diffused in the z direction, which is perpendicular
No,
to
so
the direction of
diffusion is
shear.
not affected by magnetic field. Is that what you want to say?
It's affected, but it's affected in the same.
Yes,
for
yes,
The same,
yes.
the same for the 3 components.
Because the quenching, the anisotropy introduced in the eta is very small, unlike the anisotropy in the alpha.
No, I mean this is an ad hoc way of just finding that, just saying that the flux tubes probably would diffuse less faster than the colloidal field. So, and I mean, I don't think one should read more into this.
So obviously more to look at. Yes.
In your prediction result, it seems that the number of sunspots in the minimum is not 0, and in this minimum is very deep.
You were talking about this
About the minimum.
tail thing.
The present
Oh,
minimum
the
was
problem.
very deep, yeah.
Okay. One thing is that at that time the model that we were using, it used to have this tail, and then I mean, which means that the sunspots of cycle 24 would start appearing before the sunspots of cycle 23 have
You mean
all
the
disappeared.
overlapping between
This
cycles?
overlapping of these tails here. This tails here, right? So at that time we had this tail problem. So, but there can be there are parameters here. Here. So this is actually not a very correct diagram, but then here also you can see that here we had considerably reduced the number of the overlap, right? So there, you look at the sunspot number in this minimum, here it is much less. But then later I found out that for this plot, I initialized it at a wrong place. I mean, slightly before the exact minimum. So when I went back and, I mean, we had to do this exercise of where exactly to initialize the field. So when I changed that a little bit, it's not that the results changed drastically, but I lost that plot. So this is the wrong plot. So instead of actually initializing the field here, I should have initialized the field somewhere here. But then, if you want to see, I mean, the deep minimum probably can be seen compared to these two things here. But the point of the idea of prediction in our model is not to predict the solar minimum, but to predict the solar maximum. So, in that sense, we are not worried about what is happening to the toroidal field at the solar minimum.
Especially because the input actually comes from
Comes,
that minimum.
yeah. So the point where we initialize the model, we cannot trust just after we have initialized, probably the results cannot be trusted that much.
So let me ask you an unfair question. How much of your salary would you put on this prediction?
No, actually now I fear that probably the sunspot cycle would be weaker than we have predicted. So
You should get some money.
I should get some money.
But it is,
No, actually, yes.
it is certainly true that NASA has been spending a lot of money both in asking people to predict and also spend a lot of money, even more money, in not having trusted any predictions and sending up the satellites or repairing expensive missions which then had to be aborted prematurely because the solar wind was so much stronger, so that the ionosphere was elevated and the friction for the spacecraft was higher, so they went into a much lower orbit much faster. So they have lost lots of money. So in that sense, it's not us who are spending any money or something like this. There's really people out there who are interested in these questions and who are spending lots of money in either way, either by losing it without the prediction or by possibly doing slightly better. So the state of the art, as you were saying, was
So it is like betting.
that there were these 30, more than 30 models. I think there's now 70 models. I mean, isn't that amazing that out of these 70 models...
And they use
there's
very
only
sophisticated methods. It's not like the other methods are just something else. But
So out of these 70 models, there's only a very, very small number of models based on actually dynamos. Normally they have
yeah,
nothing
and
to
they
do with dynamos,
span
these
the
models.
entire space. So the sun has to do something between this, right? And no, but another thing that I wanted to say is that now if the sun makes a clear choice whether it wants to have a weak cycle or a strong cycle, then from the Babcock-Leighton modeling point of view, we can say probably the solar dynamo is a high diffusivity dynamo and not a low diffusivity one. That is probably something we can say with some confidence that the sun makes a clear choice. I mean, either low diffusivity or high diffusivity. But if it lies in the middle, then it will be really horrible because both these groups can tweak their parameters and get down there. Oh, we did something wrong.
How long does it take to run a simulation? To make a prediction, how does it take?
Oh, it's probably a matter of running the code for less than half an hour.
Any question?
Yeah, I'm always confused with the terminology used sometimes. You can say that the dynamo works on a diffusive regime or advective regime. But even when he is working on advective regime, you can have high diffusivities, right?
Yes.
It only means that velocities.
The transport by the velocity is still faster than what the diffusion is.
I think there are two cases. In this case, the colloidal field diffusivity is very high. So the colloidal field is diffusing very fast. Whereas colloidal field, the diffusivity is small, so it is dragged by the meridional circulation pretty much than the colloidal.
So probably for the colloidal field, the diffusion if you take these two different diffusivities, so the colloidal field, the diffusion is more important form of transport, whereas for the toroidal field, it's the advection which is the more important form of transport.
I think there's another point, namely the profiles that you assume for alpha. Because if you took a distributed profile for alpha, I don't think it would work. If you actually look in the original 95 paper, David Moss and I tried to reproduce it at the time, and we failed. And the reason was simply because they had a misprint in the depth over which the alpha effect declined with height. They had a maximum at the surface, and instead of, and the profile was something like this. This was the top, it's somehow the other way around, top and bottom. And so according to their misprint, the depths would be more like this. And in that case, it didn't work. And we struggled, and then, of course, then they told us that they had a misprint.
So you had a solar-like differential rotation profile? Or
no, the alpha profile.
No, but you must be having a differential rotation profile. So it was solar-like, right?
Of course, yes.
So then if you take a convection zone alpha, then actually the latitudinal differential rotation becomes very important because...
but that was not even part of their original paper, which we would try to reproduce. The thing is that it was quite a surprise in the literature, because, of course, meridional circulation has been included in many models since the very early days, in the very early 70s. Collins-Weyler did models, Paul Roberts did models, Stix did models, many people did models throughout, and the results until then were that as you make it bigger and bigger, the meridional circulation, and all these models were distributed alpha effects, as you make it bigger and bigger, eventually there comes a point where the dynamo becomes non-oscillatory. And that was the end of oscillatory dynamos. So that was a result throughout. And the only way to get it that differently is, as far as I have believed then, was this profile. You do need to have absence of alpha in certain parts of the domain.
Yeah, but I don't know, I don't remember, in the Surya code, is the alpha has a lower quench?
No.
But it should have, right? Because if it is a surface effect, it should not act on smaller fields, right?
No, but how do you know that the Babcock-Leighton process is not happening on the active regions you cannot see?
No, I mean in the Surya, because it pops up the field up.
Yes, it does, but it adds to the polar toroidal field that is already there in the surface. And alpha acts on that sum of that field.
Yeah, but it also going to act on the diffuse field, right?
Diffuse field as in the diffuse toroidal field.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Because if you only
But
if you only use alpha which acts on those eruptions, the model doesn't work, it just decays. So I mean the magnetic buoyancy algorithm that we use, it is just a nonlinearity to limit the amplitude.
Excuse me, what is
The
your
dynamo.
question?
If the Backward-Clayton mechanism is the decay of active regions, right? So the alpha, it's due to the decay of these active regions. If alpha is working on the diffused field, then you have an extra term contributing for the production of colloidal, right, on the surface. That comes from the diffused field.
No, that comes from the field that is
It's come from the
transported in the buoyancy mechanism.
Yeah, but it
no,
acts on
not
both.
just that field. We add it to the toroidal field that is already present at the surface. So suppose the toroidal field was d phi r. So we take this field dc and we just add this dc to that r. And alpha is acting on the total field. So magnetic buoyancy is just a nonlinearity to limit the amplitude, and it is not. It is not in the model. It is not playing integral part in that
Yes.
Backward-Clayton mechanism per se. And if you just act your alpha on those eruptions, then your dynamo won't work. It just decays. It doesn't even last one cycle. So
Even if you increase alpha a little bit.
in fact, if you keep on increasing alpha a lot, then in some of the simulations I've observed that it still decays. I mean, it grows and then it decays.
There's more opportunity to talk to Piali during the break, and of course also I think next week there's more group work. So thanks to Piali again.